Welcome to Conscious Life Design. I'm your host, Alina Suk, a creative entrepreneur and master coach. Grab a cup of coffee and settle in as we lift the veil of the highlight reels and talk about what actually moves the needle to creating a life that lights you up. We'll blend science and spirituality, corporate and entrepreneurial experience, along with strategy and intuition. Without further ado, here's today's episode. All right, welcome back to Conscious Life Design. I am so excited for this conversation. Today, I have Desiree K with me, and she is a millennial behavioral health therapist with a focus in mindfulness and ideal self-development. And Des and I connected years ago through Instagram. I believe it was through that group of like spiritual, entrepreneurial women on Instagram that somebody put together. And we connected and we've been following each other ever since. And something that's pretty cool, and I'm not sure if I ever shared this with you in this detail, but you were like 6 months ahead of me in the journey that I was embarking on. So you had just left your corporate job and began the coaching business. And I was like on the cusp of leaving my corporate job. And so you were kind of like a North Star for me at the time, because I was like, okay, she's doing it. And I loved, like, we've always really vibed with our approach and our style. So it's been really wonderful to be on this journey with you in this way. And so today I would love for you to share your story. And the way that I love to start is to ask you what conscious life design means to you.
Awesome. That I remember this period too of like coming into Instagram and our connection. And I don't think I realized it was like that time period apart. So I appreciate like just hearing that. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, so like I feel like philosophies and ways of conceptualizing life align a lot. And conscious life design to me, I feel like has changed over the course of time, like how I perceive it, how I conceptualize it. And so before going into like formal training of becoming a therapist, I had more of like this creative idea of like, what is designing my life? How do I want to really embody my ideal self? And I've always talked a lot about ideal self creation. And through my master's program, there's like a whole theoretical orientation around creating your ideal self and understanding that the root of human suffering is the dissonance between the real self, who you are today, and who you want to be so badly. And so that middle part is the pain that we can run into. And so conscious life design to me, I feel like is a mix of how I saw it before and a mix of like theoretical orientations that I've come to learn and just mashing those together in a way that makes sense to me. And so I think there's a big part of like that creativity and kind of like novelty that comes with the unknown. It's really, I think, special to not always have the answers to things so that you can figure it out on your own and explore and play and ask questions and really take the seat of a beginner, because I feel like that helps us so much when we're trying new things and we want to be like the expert. Like, I want to be so good at this thing. And we forget like so much of that learning and developmental processing, even as adults, come from that beginner's mindset. And then through like theory and kind of understanding cognitively how our minds work, that's like so beneficial to take the beginner's mindset so that you can like pace yourself and not like create all of these expectations that you've already internalized that is telling you who you should be. Like, you really have to befriend yourself and know like, hey, we're on the same team. So like, we're going to take this one step at a time. And we're going to practice and practice and practice until we start seeing these habits or roles that we want to embody start to then become integrated into our lifestyle. And so I like to really focus on like, what behavior or what role am I trying to embody now? so that I can start taking my little baby steps every day to where eventually it's going to be fully immersed into my lifestyle.
Hmm. I love that. And there's so much peace that comes with acknowledging that you're a beginner and allowing yourself to
Yes.
be a beginner,
Mm-hmm.
because people do put a lot of pressure on themselves to be experts right away, perfect right away. And
Yeah.
especially something that I noticed you've been talking about recently too is the role of social media in that, because there are so many experts on social media.
Yeah.
So that's beautiful. So you're talking about consciously deciding who you want to embody, what you want to embody,
Yes.
and then deciding what those steps towards that are,
Right.
and making sure they're small.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes.
Bite-sized chunks.
Yep.
And it,
I'm
yeah,
I mean,
it can give us like little buy-in too when we have like, there's our dopamine. Like once we see like, oh, I was able to accomplish my meditation today, or I was able to accomplish reflecting on my day, you start to build buy-in with yourself. And that's why those little tiny pieces are really important,
Mhm.
because you build your self-efficacy and believing like, oh, I can do this thing. So now I
Mhm.
can kind of start building more.
Yeah. Self-efficacy. I remember that one from my master's too. It's like when you start to speak the language.
Yeah.
um, so tell us a little bit about your journey. Maybe you can start wherever you want. I met you when you were in that transition
Mm.
out of corporate and into your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. We'll start there. So I went to undergraduate for business school, graduated with a degree in marketing, and then went full corporate mode. So I was in the corporate setting for about 6 years, was really successful. By the end, had my own team. And I was severely like burnt out, but also just feeling a deep incongruence between the work I was doing and who I felt like I was becoming. And I didn't quite know who I was becoming, but I knew like all of my interests began to shift once I moved from my home state of Arkansas to Colorado. And I was just being exposed to like a brand new world. And there was just like the job felt like it was pulling me back, and it was lucrative, and it, like I was comfortable. But it wasn't enough on the inside. And so I started seeing a therapist and just started doing some inner work. I met with a shaman, and this shaman told me I should move to Arizona. And I was like, sure. So I ended up resigning from my corporate job, had enough savings for about a year, to where I wouldn't have to look for another job if I didn't want to. And so that was very fortunate to have that financial stability to be able to make a move like that. And so I moved to Arizona, moved to a little pocket, and just spent a lot of time reflecting on like, who the hell am I? Like, who do I want to be? Like, what am I doing with my life? Sort of thing. And through that, I started really sharing more personal information online. And before I left my corporate position, I was already kind of documenting my travels because I would travel a lot for my corporate role. And I started building a following, and I dabbled in a lot of different things on social media. I feel like pretty early on, as far as like the fitness stuff and sharing what I was eating, clothes, all of these things. And so I started collecting people who were just interested along the way. And then I made a very radical shift to talking about healing and inner work and reparenting and inner child, and like pretty much my whole experience of what I was going through and finding myself. I felt comfort in sharing my experiences with other people who were starting to like explore the same. And so then I started pulling curriculum together and doing a lot of research on like coaching and how to share this information with others as I was like navigating through it myself. And that's where the coaching business kind of became what it was. And it was very successful. I enjoyed it. I love being able to like speak and teach and be also like right there with clients. I've always continue to say to clients, like, there is no like hierarchy here. Like, I am your equal. Like, I just happen to have more knowledge in this specific area, but you have more knowledge in so many other areas. And so always trying to make sure we know we're side to side, is very important. I feel like, especially when you're in a lot of vulnerable work. But yeah, I did coaching for about 2 years, social media influencing alongside that for 2 years. And as I continued in that work, I started to realize like there's a scope of practice that I'm able to work with people. And as they start to like talk about trauma, I didn't have the credentialing, I did not have the education to where I felt comfortable to go there. And this is really before like the trauma informed like certifications even like began to boom. And so I was like, I want to help you, but I like don't feel ethically sound to be able to continue this dynamic. And so I started referring a lot of people out to therapists. And I was like, well, I really want to go deep in this work. I took time to reflect. I ended up applying for graduate school, and I just graduated with my master's in counseling psychology. I'm a therapist.
Congrats.
Thank you. So all of
Huge.
these massive, like I'm first gen student. So first in my family to go on and get higher education like this.
Amazing.
Massive. Also just being a woman of color in this field just feels incredible. So all of that, like I think all of my nuggets and paths and exploration has all led to like my present moment. And there was literally never a time I feel like where I was like, I'm going to do corporate first, and then I'm going to do social media, and then I'm going to, like it all just kind of happened in a really beautiful way that now that when I reflect, I'm like, all of this makes sense. Now I kind of have like all these little buckets of knowledge that I can like tap into and pull from to be able to feel really sound and grounded in the messaging that I can give out to others. Especially in like a really cool way of having that mix of being a life coach in the past and then also doing the social media and understanding like how like emotions that can be evoked through sharing your life so much online, which I took a massive social media break.
I wanted to talk to you about that as well. We'll get to that. We have so much ground to cover. I've been taking notes that could let you tell your story in its flow. So I'll let you kind of add anything to your story before I start going into it little by little.
Absolutely. I just feel like there's been so many pivots in my life, certainly professionally, but also personally. And through those pivots and things that I couldn't necessarily plan for, it's allowed me to adapt a very flexible mindset and kind of trust the unknown. Like everything's gonna be fine, and then when things aren't, we are so fortunate to have enough resources today to ask for help in whatever capacity that looks like in whatever way that makes sense for our learning styles, for what safety feels like for us. And so learning to trust that like flexibility and know that there's enough self-trust developed within now due to all of the changes and unexpected life fiascos that, like we're able to like come down and the air always tends to clear. And forming that development of like self-trust and knowing like, okay, I've been through hard situations before and I figured it out. And now like if there's a hard situation, I figured it out on my own before, but now I know how to ask for help and I feel safe asking for help and trusting others. And so that trust begins to expand and you develop community. And so you're not alone. And then you deeply know you're not alone. And so you don't feel like that isolation of I have to figure this out by myself. And that has been very, very helpful. And just really feeling comfortable and taking up space and like knowing that like you have people here rooting for you and loving on you and being able to kind of like expand in that way has felt very different from even when I was kind of doing social media early on, because it felt like a very one-way exchange for me. Like I felt like I had so much emotional processing that I was trying to get out that it was like very me-centered, and I think that needed to transpire for whatever reason. And now there's a big change and like I have a space to hold for a lot of people. I mean, it's the work I'm doing as a therapist. I'm holding tons of space for tons of people. I have the capacity to be able to do that now. Whereas before, like I remember like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with all of this information. But just being very grounded in identity and knowing identity can change and welcoming change allows for a lot of that flexibility.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. In your studies over the last couple of years, or maybe even before, did you ever dive into the hero's journey much by Joseph Campbell?
No, I didn't.
So I recently, it came up in my last podcast episode of my last guest, and I've heard of it before, but recently I've been really diving deeper into it. And he speaks of this hero's journey, and really all of us are at some stage of it.
Mm,
I think a lot of us don't really move past stages 1 and 2,
mhm,
but the idea is that, I mean, this is going to be a whole course that I'm working on. So
amazing.
to give a high level, it's like stage 1 of the journey is ordinary life, where you feel a call to adventure and you're like, okay, like I want to go explore. It could be like a higher purpose, a challenge, something is just calling your name. And then you get all this self-doubt. And then if you're able to push through that initial barrier, you get to a place where you can actually start to expand your mind to possibilities. And
Mhm,
usually at that point, some kind of mentor comes in, a
mhm.
wise person, maybe multiple mentors and wise people. It sounds like in your story, that was this shaman who was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you're meant for something more." And then you cross the threshold into the unknown.
Mm,
And then from there, you're just going through it. There's
yeah.
just like trials and challenges, and it's not all scary and bad. There's a lot of like little wins. And I renamed it the labyrinth of self-discovery. It's just like
Mm,
confusing and like
yeah.
really weird. And when you're able to push through that, you get to what I call the blossoming harvest, where you're like, "Ooh, okay, like I'm really, to me, maybe for you, that was like your coaching business. You're like, wow, like I'm really like helping people and
Yeah.
using and then at some point you get this call back home and
Mhm.
you're like, I need to take this wisdom and like really
Mm,
share it
yes.
to where I came from. And now you went and you took it to the next, took it deeper and got the skills that you were feeling like weren't there to really help people to the next level, like in a different capacity, I would say.
Great.
And the beautiful thing about the journey, because going back home is really like the end,
Mhm.
technically,
Yeah.
but it's actually really a spiral. And every time you come back, you end up on a higher plane. So even if you end up where you started, like maybe as a student, for example, you're on a higher plane.
Yes.
You have like evolved challenges and you have all this wisdom and that self discovery, that labyrinth that you went through, those
Mhm.
skills that you learned when you were in the unknown.
Mhm.
And you get to start again.
Yes.
And it's super fun when you can kind of see it that way, because a lot of people do get stuck in those challenging times, but
Yeah.
everyone is somewhere on this journey.
Mhm. Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really cool concept.
Mhm.
So back to you and your story.
Mhm.
You mentioned that when you were in that corporate job, you were feeling burnout, and I'm curious to know if that came from work-life balance and like actually overworking, or if you feel like that came from the incongruence, or maybe a combination of both.
I would say maybe a combination of both, but more so the incongruence between
Mhm.
the work I was in and this call within. Like, I really knew I needed to go within very deeply. And the role that I had at the time, like, I was in sales.
Mhm.
And so, like, I had to be forward facing with everyone. And I was just having such a deep pull to, like, be inwards. And so that was just like, pulling that was just very, very hard on, like, emotionally, mentally. Is like, I don't
Mhm.
I like, this feels way too out of alignment that
Mhm.
I don't feel like I'm going to be able to do the work, like the corporate job work that I had been doing so almost easily,
Yeah.
because there was such a pull to go inside.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that, and that's actually why I asked the question, was because when I got to that point in my journey,
Mhm.
I was managing my workload fine.
Yeah.
I wasn't really feeling burnt out. Like it wasn't like a traditional stressful situation, like when you kind of
Yeah.
hear like Wall Street, like you're just working these like insane
Mhm.
hours and like there's
Mhm.
this crazy pressure. Like I didn't feel that, but I felt burnt out from that misalignment.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really valuable to talk
Mhm.
about, because a
Mhm.
lot of people feel some guilt when they're in a like cushy situation, and they're like, I remember the guy that I was dating at the time was like, "What do you like? What more do you want? Like, you have a job that pays you well. Like,
Mhm.
this is what most people like really want, you know?" And I was like, mm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
something interesting too, worth noting, is that I think that there is this element of people putting pressure on their job to be their passion, and I don't
Mhm.
think it needs to be that. I'm not sure what your thoughts are on this topic, but anytime you put pressure on your job to be your passion or your passion to be your job, it usually, like, any type of pressure is usually not
Yeah.
conducive.
Right.
So it wasn't so much that I was like wanting my job to be my passion. I just like wanted to know what my passion actually was.
Yeah. Like what you were genuinely interested in.
Yeah.
When you were saying like your ex was like, what more could you want?
Uh-huh.
I was met with so many of those messagings because I
Mhm,
had like the Mercedes and I had the downtown locked and
mhm,
I had like my biweekly nail appointment. Like all of these very materialistic things like were at my fingertips. And it was very healing because I grew up in lower SES working class where money was not accessible to us and we thrifted and we grew up on like cereal and dry milk powder. Like I did not have nice things. And so like being able to attain money, I think was healing in its own way and
mhm.
kind of led me back to knowing like I don't need it. It's nice to have.
Yeah.
And we need it to an extent.
It's the
And
resource, not the end goal.
exactly. And what I feel like you were desiring sounds like and what I was like inner peace.
Mhm.
I want to be happy.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
just want to feel good.
Yeah.
And the passion kind of like turning into a work thing, I think is a very like capitalistic mindset and one that is
Mhm.
rooted in the American dream, which is not made for all of us and
Mm.
never was. And so I think that like with role and identity, various roles that we obtain, I think it's important like to acknowledge, yes, as far as working and understanding we need to make money to survive in this world, that can look like a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And really figuring out what your values are can help you understand how much money you need to make
Mhm.
sure that your baseline is met. But are you living a life that you think you should be living because of the messages that we have all around us that are endless, that are saying, you should be at this point in your life. You should be making this much at this age. You should have already bought a house. You should already have started a family. Like all of these societal norms, do any of those really align with you?
Mhm.
What do you actually want to be doing? What actually makes you happy?
Yeah.
And for me, like as long as I'm near the mountains, I'm
Mhm.
going to be happy because it gives me a sense of grounding. Um, and I think having access to all of that stuff financially helps me realize like these things don't necessarily make me happy. They're nice to have, but like what makes me happy is knowing who I am, being
Mhm.
able to be of service, having really deep rooted relationships, being able to cook good food, and like being
Mhm.
able to have access to nature is really important to me. And so surrounding like my lifestyle around that so that I can have those things as easy access for me doesn't necessarily require me to like hate my life in a job just to have like fancy, nicer
Mhm.
things. But
Yeah.
I don't think I would have gotten to that understanding um, without kind of just going inwards and really understanding like what actually matters to me.
Yeah, and the ease with which you just listed out the things that are important to you really show that you are embodied in this work. And I mean, I know that. But for anyone who's listening who maybe hears you for the first time, like think about the ease with which you just listed all the things that are so important to you.
Mm-hmm.
Most people that you talk to, I can bet probably would not be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that happens by accident.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. Yeah.
It doesn't. That's why I think a big part of even self-confidence is proactively getting to know yourself so that you can show up and say, these are the things that I love.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And something that kind of, you just highlighted something in my brain.
Mm-hmm.
The path to understanding who you are. Like, there's so many things that can happen in our lives that may cause a disconnect of not knowing who you are. And so you can be 30 something and have a moment where you're like, why don't I know what my interests are? Why don't I know what my hobbies are? And that could be because of various things you've experienced in your life. And that's okay. Like, it's never too late, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's never too late to develop that curiosity
Never.
ever, because it's going to change. Like,
Right.
yeah, 5 years from now, your interest, my interest, that list I just gave I don't imagine it to change drastically, but there could be a different priority of things
Yeah.
of like, this is my main focus now.
Yeah, well, I'll give an example of how my priorities changed. I just finished what I would consider one round of my hero's journey when 5 years ago I moved to Miami,
Mhm.
and my intention and my interests were like I was still like kind of early in this like what I would consider my biggest spiritual awakening when I was transitioning careers. And I wanted to be around people. I just had decided I wanted to be in a tropical environment surrounded by entrepreneurs and start my own business. And that was just like energy, energy, energy. And I
Yeah.
had that. And it was beautiful. And it created this magnificent life story that I'm so proud of. And then over the last like 6 to 8 months or so, I just stopped really resonating with that. And I was just like, okay, like I actually really miss, and this is probably because we're maybe because we're earth signs. I'm like, I miss being grounded. Like I was living in a high rise on the 29th floor, and I was like, I had this beautiful water view, like
Yeah.
180, just massive, and I felt like it was swallowing me. Like it was so beautiful on paper, but I was like, I want grass. I want trees.
Yep.
I don't want to take an elevator anymore.
Yes.
I want to just come outside and be on the ground.
Yes.
And so it's absolutely going to change, and like actually resisting that change is going to create incongruence. And like one of the things that I was thinking of recently is like when your dream life is no longer your dream life. Like that's a whole other psychological challenge
Yes.
if you don't really have the tools to handle it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like you're saying, the place where you have been living at one point was a dream life. The corporate job I had and being able to fulfill all these things I never had as a child met a dream. And then that changed, and it's going to continue to evolve. And we have to allow it to know like it is okay. This is a natural process of life. But yes, the tools to be able to get there and accept it. Cause I think that's like the part where we get really rigid and we want to hold on so tightly to what we know because OMG, this is so scary. And we have anxiety and we have self-doubt. And if we could just normalize that is common. That is normal to feel these things when we are about to make a major life change, especially if we haven't had somebody in our lives that we can look to who has done this. And I think it's interesting kind of like around our age group and our generation. I'm in my early 30s. Like we are millennials. And so like most of our parents followed a very traditional type of life of like, you get your job, you get married, you have kids, and then you tend to the family. And now, like, I think a lot of us millennials are kind of experimental, but also have a lot of roots in traditional norms. And so, like, breaking those can feel scary at times. And then we have the generation under us who is just like ready to go, experimental and free. And I think we can learn a lot from their mindset and their playfulness to work to embody that for ourselves, because it helps so much, again, to remain flexible, to be able to accept like the unknown while also knowing you do have the ability to create whatever lives you want, as long as you can be comfortable with the ebbs and flows of what's to come that you can't quite put your finger on yet.
Yeah. And I think that those expectations of more rigid things we've been shown or told, for me, that represents like those weeds of doubt when you're being called for your adventure and they're like, no, this adventure is wrong.
Yeah.
That could be a big barrier for taking action. So I'm curious to know if you have like a favorite tool for people who are in the weeds of doubt.
I think like developing a sense of curiosity. So like lots of mindset here. Instead of the I shoulds, like I wonder if, I wonder what life would look like if I chose differently. Developing a strong sense of curiosity and trying to work to replace the I really should be doing this, or I think this is what's expected of me, and flipping that to I wonder what would happen if I did this instead. Um, being able to be curious about outcomes allows for lots of different options to land in our lap, which gives you choice to choose which option you want to pursue. And hey, if you change your mind, you have 5 more options that you just explored that you could try on for size. I think developing like a community and also too is like really supportive. So surrounding yourself with like-minded people who are going to stretch you and who are also going to sort of like cheer you on along the way. Safety is really important. Like you need to feel like you can delve into these conversations without feeling judged. And your nervous system will know pretty quickly if you feel safe in an environment or not. But that I think is also extremely important. Books are great. YouTube is great. I have loved, and I continue to do this, and I've done this for years, is to just find different creators with various identities. I've watched so many different types of people, men, women, younger, older, just explain like their life and like how they go about like lessons learned. And I like to pull from as much, like there's not like one single philosophy or way of life that I'm like, that's mine. I really like to be eclectic with it. And cool. Like I like these ideologies from mindfulness, and I like these from stoicism, and I like these from character development, and I like these from theoretical orientation. And I kind of pull them all together and make like my magical little potion and try to live my life by values that align with that. But that's a lot of various like tips and nuggets, I suppose. But maintaining curiosity, I think it's huge.
I definitely agree. I think like I can definitely speak to each of those. Like if depending on what I'm working on within myself, that's how I select books. If I'm working on money mindset, I'll read a money mindset book. If I want to go back to my spirituality, I'll pick up a spiritual text. And like these books have all these messages that we need to hear if we just pick them up. And also community is huge for all the reasons that you listed, as well as what I found, because community was a huge theme from my last journey. I really found community in Miami. And something that was really apparent to me is that your community has the power to mirror your highest self when you don't see it. So that was something that came through to me in the community that I found, is I was trying a lot of new things for the first time. So which is vulnerable and nerve-wracking. And I had people in my life who were like, this is awesome, this looks great, this sounds great, and not in a yes man kind of way, but genuine, because you don't want people who are just blindly supporting you. Like you want people who are honest with you and will tell you the truth. That's also really important. It's not like surrounding yourself with people who are just obsessed with you. People who will tell you the truth and will generously give you positive feedback during those vulnerable times.
Absolutely.
And you also spoke to changing your environment. You spoke to that in your story, and that was true in my story as well. I think that is so great for the brain, for neuroplasticity, to just put yourself into a totally different space.
Yeah, absolutely is. You can just gather so much creativity, again, curiosity, and it's just exposing your brain to like new environments. And you can start small with that. You can go to a different coffee shop in your town. It can be something as simple as that, especially if you're someone who has a bit of social anxiety, especially coming out of COVID. Like there's still a lot of processing there that is happening with our bodies. And so starting small is great, and just seeing how you feel. Like, oh, is this scary? Does this feel good? Maybe I'll try a different coffee shop next week and see what comes up.
Yeah, you don't have to sell all your stuff and move to a different state, I guess.
Totally. I mean, for
I
whatever reason, we
guess.
chose to do that, but you
But if
don't
you
have
do want to
to.
do that, you can also.
You can also do that. There's people here who can speak to it.
Yeah. Different coffee shop, different state, whatever floats your boat,
Whatever feels
whatever
right.
your capacity is for change.
Yes.
But I do love that you bring it back to keeping things very immediate and small, because that just starts to build the energy of the thing that you're doing. That's actually something that I did. I just shared with you before we started the call that when I was getting my master's,
Mhm.
I had passed all the classes on the first try. And then when it came to the dissertation, I failed my first dissertation proposal. And that put a lot of pressure on me because I only had one more chance to do it.
Mhm.
And I started having all of these limiting beliefs of like that I can't finish what I started. And for me, I know this came at least from this. As a kid, I used to pick up hobbies and drop them all the time. And like my parents would let me.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh my God, I can't finish what I started. So I started doing little things day to day
Mhm.
fully. Where like
Right.
if I'm washing the dishes, if I would like want to let something soak, I'm like, no,
Yes.
I'm gonna finish. I'm gonna leave this complete. If I'm doing a workout and I kind of feel like tapping out early, I was like, no, I'm going to complete this
Yes.
to prove to myself that I do finish what I start.
Yes. Yes. Those tactics are so important. And again, it gives you that buy-in. It gives you that self-belief, like, I can do this. And you build that momentum within self. And then naturally you'll start to build that self-confidence of like, maybe I can do something a little bigger and see it all the way through. Absolutely. That is wonderful advice.
Yes. And so I want to make sure we touch on your social media hiatus,
Mm.
because I see a lot of people saying like I'm taking the weekend off, I'm taking a week off, but you took like years.
I did. I took 2 years off.
So tell us what it's like out there.
It was one of the best things I did for myself. So I think my account was to 10,000 followers when I left. And I felt a very similar call to go within that I did when I did corporate. So when you mentioned that cycle, that came to mind because it was very similar. Um, and so yeah, I had to read. I can't remember what the book was at this moment, but there was a book that I had to read because my dopamine triggers were so connected to my social media. And I had notifications off already at this point, but I was still checking really often, and my community was incredible. And they were so engaged. And I was really fortunate not to have like any like hate or any trolls. Like I was really fortunate in that aspect. So the anxiety wasn't coming from there, but the anxiety that I was feeling was there's incongruence again. And I am being called to go in and explore what this next chapter is of going to school and being a student again. And I knew I didn't want to be student and teacher at the same time. That came through really clear to me that I did not want to, I wanted to fully be a student. And in order for me to fully be in that identity, I felt like I didn't want to be teaching what I was learning alongside in school on this platform. And so I read a book that was like how to like detox your brain from like the dopamine that you're receiving from social media. And it again kind of listed out small baby steps, like start with an afternoon where you're not on social media, see how that feels, journal about it. Next, you can move towards taking a day. Next, you can move towards taking a weekend. Next, you can move towards week, month, and then I didn't know I was going to be gone for 2 years, but I was, and it's awesome.
One afternoon turns into 2 years.
It's crazy how that can happen.
That
But
sounds like the name of a book title.
yeah, it does.
From one afternoon to 2 years.
But yeah, it just like I felt that call, and I tried to let people know that I was going to be gone. And that I didn't know when I was like if I was going to come back to social media or not, but I knew that I wanted to be a student as I was pursuing my master's. And there was so much like newness around being accepted into grad school, again, just like with my background, and no one in my family had done this before, and then being Latina and like not very very many Latinos get into graduate school. And so I was feeling like that sort of pressure of like, oh, I really need to give my undivided attention to this because this is kind of a big deal to me. And I just wanted all my attention to be there. And so I left, and there was like such peace of mind that came from that feeling like I needed to document my day. Because I shared a lot of like my day-to-day activities. And it was a beautiful blessing in my life to not like share what I was going through as I was going through it, because I had developed that habit. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with it. But for me, I could feel like it wasn't sustainable to do anymore. And I wanted to experience like, what is life going to feel like when I'm reaching milestones and I don't feel like I need external validation from it. And that was the big piece that I learned. And now as I created a whole new account, so I like permanently deleted my large following. And that felt really good. And it was kind of scary because it was like, what if I come back and then I have to start from scratch? Well, I did, and it's fine. I just have like so many learnings from that previous experience to where now showing up feels good. And I have a lot of boundaries around what I share and what I don't share. And really just allowing it to be a creative space of exploration of like, I'm very confident in who I am and very grounded. And there's times where I'll have my own bouts of self-doubt because I'm human. And it's not attached to like my social media anymore. You know, it's more of like normal things that like, oh my gosh, I have to study for comps and I'm like freaking out and I hate my life because that my whole weekend is like dedicated to studying, you know, versus like, what is somebody going to think if I post whatever? Or what if I have this really creative idea and it doesn't land? And then in school, I did quite a bit of research around the effects of social media, and how it just like can affect either our psyche or body image, developing like insecurity because your engagement isn't where you thought it should be, like all new things that us as humans have never had to have before. And I found that research to be pretty fascinating. But
what was one of the most interesting things that you learned about that? Because I do think that people are really starting to feel the compound effect from the last, I mean, what would you say, like decade? I guess you would know better in your research. Has it been the last decade that's really starting to be honest?
Absolutely. I'd say within the last 15 years or so, because they go back to like MySpace and all of like kind of the development before Facebook. But what I see a lot in the research is like this becoming attached to the identity you're making online versus like your real life. Yeah. And so like kind of becoming enamored with your online identity and taking that as truth and getting validation there versus becoming more isolated in your real life. Because now if I put more energy, effort, and time into my social media persona, I can now monetize it. I can now make money from it. And then you start to become detached from
so scary.
Who you are as a person. And so like your relationships can start to dwindle, or maybe you just become obsessed or addicted to this, whatever you're developing and building. And so then where it gets a little hairy is like, that's already kind of like concerning, but like,
That's already hairy.
especially when your self-worth or like where, if you already have issues with validation, right? If you're already kind of struggling with, I need a lot of validation in my life. And I'm also pulling from personal experience here. If that then becomes tied to a number where you can tangibly see it, and then this algorithm in like social media has changed so much in the past 5 years even. And so like, that's something that's unpredictable and something you can't control. And so like let's say if you have an environment where you were raised and always trying to get the approval of your parent, and they, for whatever reason, they weren't able to give it to you. Now, like you take this mindset attachment issue here, and then you copy paste it over to an online platform where maybe you're getting lots of validation and it feels good. And for whatever reason, engagement dips due to the algorithm, whatever, then you're internalizing it and taking it personally. And it's causing a big trigger, a big reaction to like, oh, this is familiar. Maybe I know why, maybe I don't know why. But kind of getting into that like repetitive cycle, you're self-esteem can really dip, and then it becomes attached to an identity that you're constantly creating
Mm.
to be accepted by others. And that's the part that makes me like, oh, like,
Yeah.
how do we talk about this more or like get in front of this? I've done more research in regards to how mindfulness can support it,
Mhm.
and learning how to go within, be comfortable with uncomfortability,
Mhm.
unpredictability, and just really learning how to develop that trust in self. And then you can be in the outside world, you can be in your inside world, you can be on your social media world, but like deeply knowing like this person is still the same person throughout.
Yeah. Yeah. That I'm very grateful that for me the authenticity kind of went hand in hand with social media because when I started using social media on purpose, it was to share my spiritual journey.
Mhm.
And so I was able to kind of keep that alignment. But I can see how it can be a very slippery slope to edit and
Mhm.
to pick and choose and create something that's actually very different. Um, so is there any key piece of advice to that will maybe not bring someone back from that, but prevent that from happening?
Um, Something really simple, I think that I started implementing early, like even when I started this new page, is just not using filters. And
Mhm.
that is very baseline.
Mhm.
So like I like to start small. And I want to start with the filter because you become adjusted to how you look with that filter on.
Yeah.
And then that can translate to you looking in the mirror at home and wanting to change things or like feeling uncomfortable with posting yourself online without a filter. And that is something.
I've seen that happen. Like I've witnessed people changing severely in real life to look like the filters that they put.
Yeah, I mean, like,
Especially living in Miami,
yeah, I'm
I see
sure.
that a lot.
I fully believe that, and that is one small thing, and that what I would just encourage to, like, develop that curiosity again, like, what are you saying to yourself when you see who you are? And what in our heads have made us feel like we're more beautiful with somebody else's idea of beauty plastered on our face? What does that mean to us? That's, I think, is a really small step that you can practice today.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, there's a phenomenon that there's like a particular look that people are starting to look the same. Like they're adjusting their own authenticity and they're starting to all look like the same person. I mean, it's not funny. I just, it's wild, right?
it
It's
is
like
wild.
there's a particular look that people are replicating, and it's
Yeah, it's concerning. It's worrisome for sure. Yeah, and yeah, like we're all beautiful as we are, and sometimes that blanket statement is not helpful. And I think going inwards and deeply knowing who you are will begin to reflect that beauty outwards because your assuredness in self, your confidence, like that radiates, and people want that. People want that genuineness, that authenticity, and who you are. Nobody else will ever have. Nobody else will ever have your exact lived experiences and things you have seen through your own unique eye that makes you who you are, that develops the words that come out of your mouth, that allows you to connect with other people. No one can ever take that away from you. And it is so worth developing and getting to know very, very deeply.
yeah, yeah. Because at the end of the day, how I see it is it comes down to self confidence because people feel like they're going to achieve a certain level of self confidence if they look a specific type of way, but self confidence, in my opinion, has nothing to do with how you look at
Mm-mm,
all.
mm-mm,
At all.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I want to just acknowledge, I've been taking classes that help me recognize my privilege. And so I do want to name that I am a small bodied petite woman. And that comes with a lot of privilege and not having to worry so much as somebody else may have to if they're in a larger body or are uncomfortable with their body. I am also able bodied. And so I just want to name that I'm coming from a large place of privilege when I say this. And so if the filter is supporting something, I want to offer something else that might not be so image focused and maybe explore like engagement, something you wrote, something you shared that like, oh, I just poured my heart into this and why is nobody engaging with it? Um, did you think it was good? Did you think it was good work on your own? Were you proud of it? Were you in alignment when you were writing it? That is all the information you need. And maybe even sharing it with like a loved one, someone you trust, and kind of getting that feedback there. But trying to take some of the stuff that you may share on the social platforms and bringing it back into your tangible real life and seeing, is there dissonance? Is there congruence? Because that can help you just with like your own reality, because we have so many things that can go on the online space that when we bring things back into our reality, we can have a totally different experience with them. Even just like writing pen to paper versus like typing something out on my notes app when I know I'm going to share it to Instagram. Some things stay with me because I'm like, oh, that was really good, but I want this to just be for me, sort of thing. Yeah.
Yes, and all of those things that you mentioned really speak to mindfulness practices, being present, doing something with your hands, like grabbing a pen and writing on a paper, deeper connections, right? That's one of the things you listed in what you value is deeper connections in your relationships. So I love that you have studied that and you are spreading that message of bringing that back. And there's a girl that another girl who I followed over the years. Her name is Lee. She went from being like a wellness influencer to now she has workshops on how to leave being an influencer, like how to exit.
Yeah.
Because she had to do that. And kind of what you were saying about like detoxing from those dopamine hits.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a newish, I guess, phenomenon that we're going through.
Yeah. It is.
I'm happy that we're speaking about it and spreading that message, because at this point, people might not even be able to identify that it's happening because it's so new.
Yeah, it's often compared to like gambling and like when you never know when you're going to hit the jackpot. Same thing with like you never know if one of your videos are going to go viral. Like it's a very similar process.
You never look at it that way.
Yeah, so you're always kind of like cashing down to see when the next one is going to hit your jackpot.
Wow. Crazy times. So I think I was taking a couple of notes about when you were telling your story, and I think I pretty much got through all of the questions that I had for you and all of the things I wanted to highlight. So I was wondering if there's anything else that you wanted to add, whether about your story, your experiences, anything at all.
Yeah, I think that like when I started this whole journey, my self-belief was very low. And I want to be honest about that because I don't think you have to start out on this journey even having like really high self-confidence or maybe even believing that you can do it. I think those little small steps are just crucial in anything that we do in our life. And even if you're just somewhat curious about life design or about choosing the route you want to go for your life, like you really just have to have like, I wonder if mindset and building on that. Because for me, like I just didn't have a lot of self-confidence starting out. I didn't. And I did have the curiosity and I had this like desire for a better life, even though I didn't necessarily knew what that meant at the time for me. And I have now come to realize that that can always change. And we always have the power and curiosity to explore what a different lifestyle or what a different choice may mean for us. So I think I would like to leave with that, is that you don't have to feel like you have some stuff figured out. Like you can start from scratch and that's going to be more than enough.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, confidence through action, right? Like that's the key.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Well, if anyone listening would like to find you, can you let them know where they can do that?
Yes. I'm hanging out over on Instagram. Let's see. I think it's Desiree K now. So you can find me there. I like to share a lot on ideal self development, so a lot about what we spoke to today. I like to keep it very real and transparent. And yeah, I like to throw in some therapy bits along the way. So if you're into that kind of stuff, come hang out.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for talking with me today, and I'm so happy to be reconnected. I actually missed your updates in the 2 years that you were away from social media, so I'm personally selfishly happy to have you back. And thank you for sharing your story today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.